Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I am here with Mary Renner Beech, who is the Chief Marketing and Transformation Officer for Scholastic. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Full disclosure, we actually went to college together way back when, a long time ago. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely.
So, Mary, I know that you're now the Chief Marketing and Transformation Officer for Scholastic. I wondered if you could start by just telling us a little bit about Scholastic, what Scholastic is, and then a little bit more about your role as both Marketing and Transformation Officer there.
Sure. So Scholastic is best known as being the largest children's book publisher in the world, and known for titles that it publishes like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. For those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, Goosebumps and the Babysitter's Club, of course, Clifford the Big Red Dog, and today for books like Captain Underpants and Dog Man. But Scholastic is also, I think, one of the ways a lot of people know Scholastic is through the book fairs. Scholastic book fairs are sort of that nostalgic moment in every childhood where they come into the school and set up, and it's sort of the best day of the year is the Scholastic Book Fair. We operate Scholastic book clubs as well in classrooms across the country, and then we have an education business helping kids with the learn to read side. Our mission is to help kids learn to read and learn to love to read. So we have both sides in what we do at Scholastic. And the role that I was brought in. Scholastic has not had a chief marketing officer for several decades. So I was brought into a relatively new role. Last June, Scholastic lost its CEO of 47 years, the founder's son, Dick Robinson. And with his passing, we brought on a new CEO who was a fellow board member. Prior to joining this role, I was on the board of Scholastic for 4 years. And Peter Warwick, our new CEO, and Yole Lucchese, our Chief Strategy Officer, asked me to join to lead marketing and transformation for the company. And for us, really to embolden our voice around kids' literacy, around the importance of reading, and the ability for us, we have amazing data about kids and what they love to read, what they engage with reading. And we want to be able to utilize that to help curate the perfect assortment for a child who's, say, in 3rd grade and really loves adventure. We have the ability to sort of Netflix reading for kids K to 6, and we're really excited to do that.
Awesome. So it automatically starts them on the next book when they finish the last one, right? Just
that is the dream. I mean, when I think, for anyone who I have 2 kids who went through that reading journey, and you know that once you can get them hooked on a series or a type of series, like they're in it. But if you really can't get them engaged, it's harder to get them onto that next book. There's so many other distractions that are brighter and shinier. So it's really important, that recommendation engine that I think every parent would love to say, okay, they just finished with, Captain Underpants, what's really going to engage them next? And have those suggestions from a company that you trust, like Scholastic.
Great. Well, so maybe talk just briefly about your role, and then I want to ask you about your journey to this position. I know you served on the board of Scholastic before, and your last couple of positions, you were CEO of Sarah Flint, and then before that, you were with a division of Kate Spade that became part of Coach. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your role, and then we can talk about that career journey.
Sure. So my focus right now at Scholastic is really on the transformation side of the role. As I mentioned, we have amazing access to data that we want to utilize and set up the organization to best utilize. And we also have an opportunity to be more consumer-centric in our approach. So we want to reinvent how we approach loyalty. We want to reinvent how we approach e-commerce, how we approach customer service. We're doing all of this incredibly effectively today, one division at a time. But we have an opportunity to look at how can we do it from a one Scholastic perspective, and really make sure that if you are a parent or a teacher or an educator or a child and want to learn to read or learn, really to engage with reading in a more intense way, that you can come to Scholastic to have, sort of all of your needs met across that kind of K through really 8th grade time in which we have great content. We have such amazing content at the company, and then we have great ways to deliver that content through book fairs and book clubs, through our trade retailers. So it's really looking across that whole universe and reinventing how we do things today.
Love it. So right before this, you took the helm of Sarah Flint, which is a high-end women's shoe company. So tell us about what brought you there. I know you had a very nice portion of your career at Kate Spade, New York, and then obviously a long time at Disney before that.
So, as a marketer, I've always been able to engage with brands that I personally love. And I love the brands and I love the customer that loves those brands. So I started my career in fashion, not because I'm a particularly fashionable person, I am not, but I really love the storytelling that goes along with fashion. We don't need any of the things largely that we buy. You can buy things that cover your body and are required, and they can be very basic. We buy fashion because it appeals to us emotionally, because there's a story associated with the brand that we want to be part of, that we want to have represent us. In many ways, fashion represents our personality. So I love that storytelling. So I started my career at Ann Taylor and Ralph Lauren, and then spent 13 years at the Walt Disney Company. And again, huge Disney fan. But there I got to experience another type of storytelling. So I worked for a bit in film marketing, but then launched the Disney Princess brand, which is where I really learned about life cycle marketing, about marketing a lifestyle. It's hard for parents of young kids to imagine a world without Disney Princess today, but it didn't used to exist as a brand. And we launched it and began telling not only selling products, but also telling stories around the princesses, and bringing it to life at the theme parks and on Disney Channel, and through new films like Princess Tiana, The Princess and the Frog, and of course Rapunzel. And there's so much more that Disney has done today since my departure in 2013. But that was a ton of fun. And then I left for the chance Disney, because I really do admire the company, both the brand they've built, but also the experience from an employee perspective was phenomenal. But I left for the chance to go be the chief marketing officer at Kate Spade. Kate Spade was another brand that I had always been a consumer of. I admired them very deeply. When I joined, they had just done about 350 million. They were reinventing. Kate launched the brand in '94, and then it had gone through some sales and had become a kind of a little bit of a sleepier brand in the early 2000s, and they were reinventing it. And so that was really fun to join at a place where it was sort of like a rocket ship, and be able to lead that brand. And the brand was acquired by Tapestry, which is the owners of Coach and Stuart Weitzman, and now Kate Spade. They were acquired by Tapestry in 2017. So that was just an amazing experience to be there. And when I left Kate in 2019, I really wanted to try my hand at being a CEO. And I joined Sarah Flint. They're a luxury direct-to-consumer footwear company. I remain an investor in the brand, so just for full disclosure. But I really admired, they were taking, beautiful high-end footwear that's made in the same factories as other very high-end footwear brands, and selling them direct to consumer at, half the cost. And I thought that was an incredible need and desire that consumers would want for very well-made footwear at a more reasonable price point. And I just love Sarah's design aesthetic. I started in February of 2020, and the pandemic hit. So it was definitely not exactly and all of our manufacturing was Italy. And if you remember back then, the pandemic at first was an Italian issue, and then it spread. I guess it was just COVID at the time, not a pandemic yet. So that was, it was definitely a wild ride for those 2 years. But I loved being a CEO. I loved working with a founder like Sarah, who's just a phenomenally talented person. I think, Joe, if I look throughout my career, I love working with creative people and helping vision a reality. And that was just another opportunity to do that. And, I would still be there if Scholastic hadn't come knocking. I think that during the pandemic, like so many people, I started thinking about my sort of what I could do with my talents for the world. I started thinking about how I could make a greater impact. And I thought a lot about joining a nonprofit at some point and doing that. I'm the main income earner, so I needed to get my kids to college before I could consider that. And when Scholastic came, and I had been on the board. I knew a lot about the company. I was, obviously very saddened about the loss of Dick and his passing. And I just thought, this is the moment. This is a very mission-driven company. It's helping kids learn to read and love to read. I was dyslexic or am dyslexic. I didn't read till the 5th grade. So I felt an identity with kids who struggle. And I thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, this is happening at this moment because I'm supposed to be doing this. And so I've never had a calling. I've always felt like I did what I was good at. But this was, I think, was my calling. I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be right now.
I love that that's part of your story, that, books were both a huge challenge, but also pivotal, I think, in your growth as a person. Once you could start reading, I think you devoured books from there, right?
I mean, I read constantly, but I remember in the 5th grade when I figured it out, it literally was like the world went from black and white to color. I got it. And I just felt like I couldn't have probably said this at 10, but I felt like I had all this catching up to do. I just wanted to read constantly, and I still feel that way. I was talking to somebody I work with, and he was, saying, he was talking about, eventual demise, about, people passing, and he's just like, I can't go. I have too many books to read. Right. And I get that. I get that idea. Like, there's too many books. There's too much reading and too many great authors out there. And I feel that. And I know, watching my kids just fall into a book and feel like they see themselves. At Scholastic, we talk about a mirror and a window, that books provide kids a mirror of their lives, but also a window into worlds that they can't today imagine or can't today experience. And I've definitely had that, experience directly and watched it in my kids. So it's exciting to be part of it now.
I absolutely love that, the idea of a mirror window. And in my little world here, I hope that some of these CMO spotlight interviews are both a mirror and a window as well. I think there are marketers that see themselves when they hear other people talk about their journeys, and then also see the potential of what their lives could be. And so I appreciate that.
I appreciate you doing it.
I love it. I love it. So I'm curious, you've had a really interesting career path. I'm wondering if there was a piece of advice that you either got or you wish you got a long time ago that was pivotal for you.
Joe, early in my career, and as Joe said, we went to college together. I definitely would always have been described as an ambitious person. I am an ambitious person, very driven, very type A. And I think early on, I was a bit collecting titles. I was very focused on achievement and titles. And I wish I had understood more that it really is about the experiences you gain. And I don't mean like, oh, the experience is more important than the money or the title. That's not necessarily the case. It's more about gaining the experiences you need to continue building your career. So, there might be a pivot in a path that you face where there's a really big title doing the same thing that you've been doing, or there's something that's a lateral move in a new area. And I would always recommend the lateral move in the new area if you're excited about it. I think that I stayed very much pure to marketing, and then I got to a point where I was like, I want to get P&L experience. I want to maybe be able to be a CEO one day, or even I think as a marketer, having P&L experience makes you much more understanding, empathetic, gives you a way to listen better and engage better with your business unit partners. And so I went for that move. I went for a lateral move to run the North American toy business at Disney, even though it wasn't, the next title up or the next pay grade up. And I did that at the vice president level. I wish I had done it earlier, but I was very focused on title at that point. And so it's really about the experiences. Are you excited about it? Is it going to be something additive for your career? Maybe you've been in brand marketing, but you need to get the analytics side, or maybe you've been all on analytics, but you haven't had any storytelling. I think that well-rounded marketers are very valuable. And so really going for those experiences is important.
So I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm really curious to hear what you feel your superpower is.
Sure. You talked a little bit about that question before, and, I'll always say that, my husband, who also went to college with Joe and I really believe that he was like put on the planet to do what he does. And I think I could be good at a lot of things. Like I could be good at a ton of different things. But I think when I look back over my career, I talked about this link of really helping, working with truly creative people and helping them realize a vision. I do think that's a superpower. I love being part of creative organizations. I love partnering with creative people who have an amazing vision or amazing gift to bring to the world, and helping them do that. And that can be, whether it was working with filmmakers at Disney, whether it's working with designers when I was at Kate and Sarah Flint, and today working with great authors and illustrators and educators, trying to bring goodness to the world. So I think there's something about putting your ego a little bit aside and being able to listen to somebody else and bring their story. My husband is a creative, so I do that personally and I do that professionally. It's definitely something I've had to learn how to do. I have a healthy ego myself. So sometimes it's hard to kind of take the back seat and sit in the background and be the conductor and not the first chair. But I enjoy that. I really get a ton of fulfillment out of that creative process and being part of the creative process. So it's both what I think I'm good at and what brings me the most joy. So it's nice when you can link those two together.
100%. Well, I was thinking about your husband the entire time you were talking about facilitating creatives to do what they do best. And obviously being married to a creative, you do it not just in your professional life, but your personal life also.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's definitely much easier professionally, sometimes personally, when you overstep those bounds, but we've come to a good balance after 23 years. So we're good.
Great. I'm curious if there are certain values that either you want to demonstrate to your team, or maybe that you even demand in somebody that would come to work for your team.
I believe very strongly in transparency. I think that people need to understand the why behind decisions, and the background and the context for decision making. I think that people can handle a lot more than traditional companies thought that they could handle. So I really am a big believer and try to be transparent as a leader and ask my leaders to be transparent. I also believe in giving a lot of rope. I like to give people the information they need to do a good job and then not micromanage. I don't like to be micromanaged, so I try not to do that in return. And that was hard for me coming up. Again, I think as a younger person, I pretty much thought that if it was going to be done well, it was going to be done by me. And I had to learn that there are so many people out there that know so much more than I do about so many things. And the best thing I can do is bring them together, remove the barriers, enable them to do their best job. And I'm also a big believer in listening. My mother always used to say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. I do think listening is incredibly important. And if you're quiet, you get so much. One of my periods of time at Disney that I didn't mention, I actually worked at Pixar Animation Studios after Disney's acquisition. And I worked for one of the founders of Pixar, a man named Ed Catmull. And Ed was the technology side. He is like the computer brain behind everything that is Pixar, and one of the smartest people I've ever met. And he had an ability to be quiet. I mean, you would ask him a question, and in the beginning, Joe, I had to count to like 60 or 65 because I'm like, wanted to interrupt, like, do you need help? Like, should I say something more? But he was thinking. And I learned by sometimes just giving people and being quiet, like asking something and then waiting, you can get a lot of information. You can get to the there behind something versus trying to fill the space. And it's hard. And I don't always knock it out of the park, but it really is the best thing. There's a space for silence, I think, that we don't leave a lot of room for today. And I think it's a big part of being a manager as well.
Well, and that may be one of your additional superpowers, because you're right, it is super tempting to break that. We feel anxious and tense when that silence happens. When you ask the question, you want to prompt them with the answer that you're expecting. But often if you give it that space, you're surprised with the answer that you end up getting.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you're chatting, posing things back to an employee, one of the things I like to do when I'm chatting with people, if they come to me with a problem, is pose the problem back to them in a way to kind of see if there's a new perspective they can bring to it. And if you're quiet, and give them a chance to really think about versus feeding the answer that you think is right, you get a much better answer usually than what you would have come up with. So I try to practice it. Again, I'm not, hitting it out of the park every day, but trying.
Great. So I want to shift directions a little bit.
Yeah.
Set up, one of our core functions is connecting brands and marketing agencies together. We do a lot of matchmaking. We're a marketing matchmaker. I'm curious, either at Scholastic or even in a previous life, just generally, how do you work with marketing agencies?
Sure. So it's interesting. A lot of my marketing career, I've partnered with marketing agencies from what I'd call a brand consultancy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I've had in-house creative for a very long time, so I don't have as much experience with working, say, on campaigns with an agency. I've tended to do that in-house. But where I've partnered most successfully is when you're really trying to tackle a big problem, like what is your North Star going to be as a brand, or you're facing a challenge and you need to pivot, or you need to reinvent your branding architecture. It's often really useful to have a third party come in to help you as the CMO 100%, even as just an advisor to you, but also to say things sometimes that the company needs to hear at that right moment, whether it's coming from the consumer or coming from that third party. So I really like to bring in agencies from a branding perspective at those pivotal moments, when you're inventing a pivotal moment because you need to look at a problem differently, or when truly you're facing a moment that you need to respond to. And then I also definitely like to use agencies for tackling issues that would be very expensive to tackle in-house. So something like retargeting or SEO, or things where, yes, you could build up an in-house function, but having that out-of-house expertise might be more affordable. So I've always used agencies for a number of the different kind of marketing stack functions that you need to do. But I've had a number. There's a branding agency called Red Scout that I've used throughout my career, and I'm using now at Scholastic, that I would say has just been an excellent partner for us at various stages of companies to come in and help us reset direction and kind of find that North Star or that new consumer purpose. And I've always had, incredibly successful outcomes from those engagements.
Well, and that's impressive because agencies tend to change quite a bit. They tend to have a lot of turnover. So if they've still been good over time, then that says something more about the process and structure than probably even the specific people.
I think it does. And I mean, in that case, the founder of the agency actually sold, and the founders that I originally worked with is no longer there. And I'm working with someone else, and I've had an equally positive experience. And I think, I love the idea that you do matchmaking, because I do think that there's a lot of mismatches that happen. And I've watched it, and I've been experienced it, and everybody always has good intentions going in, but listen, honestly, as a brand, sometimes you're not truthful on what your real needs are, or you don't necessarily fully understand what your needs are. And then sometimes on the agency side, in the effort to get the work, you may not be fully honest about what your capabilities are. And then you end up with a mismatch. And I've seen that happen, any number of times. So I think having that, again, third-party support to help everybody be honest in what their needs are and what their capabilities are to match that is an amazing service to offer.
Well, thank you. It's funny because you touched on something that I've seen more and more, is that our process usually begins as a psychologist, either for the brand or for the agencies, or both. To really uncover what the root issue and problem is. Before you can solve the problem, you have to really define the problem. So we always begin by helping the client write a really clear brief, because we found that usually with a vague brief or a brief that's not specific enough, it causes a poor match. And so we usually begin the process with the psychology of understanding what you're trying to accomplish, and then defining it really clearly on paper. And then we can go about trying to find some solutions.
I think it was Albert Einstein who said if he had an hour to save the world, he'd spend 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute solving it. So I do think that is so important to really know what the there is. And we often joke in this role in transformation at Scholastic, the lead on my team had a psychology degree and then went into marketing, much to her parents' chagrin. And she's like, I use my psychology degree every single day. So I do think there's an element of that in all of marketing, is understanding psychology internally and externally.
Well, and we could do a whole nother conversation on what your theater major did for you and throughout your career, but I'm going to keep things moving.
For sure.
I think we wrote a blog post talking a little bit about your theater major a long time ago when you were at Spade. So I'm curious, we often as marketers work with non-marketing functions within the organization or externally. I'm curious, how do you demonstrate the value of marketing to people that don't live and breathe marketing all day?
Sure. I mean, at Scholastic, we're very focused on how marketing can impact revenue. I think that, we want everything to have a metric that is based around revenue growth. And where we can't do that, maybe it's around lead generation or, demand, engagement to some degree, although I'm seeing less and less enthusiasm from the finance side of the organization around engagement metrics. And listen, depending on what it is a little bit of a false metric. It's great to have engagement, but if it isn't translating to the bottom line. So I think we very much try to root everything in how we're helping the company forward their growth goals. And I think as marketers, we have to be very comfortable in signing up for accountability around growth. It's tough to be in that A of the racy and to be signing up to take ownership. But I think the process of putting together a business plan and putting your money where your mouth is important as marketers, and to get out there and say, we believe this is going to have an impact on the bottom line or a cost savings. Some of what, in the marketing world we're all doing now is how can we restructure to be more effective as more and more specialties come up in marketing? How are you taking things centrally? So sometimes it's cost savings, but ultimately, I believe it should be revenue generation. And that will help just orient the conversation a little bit better as we, start to talk to our peers across the organization. We're all talking the same language.
I'm curious if there's a program or a campaign that you either have run at Scholastic or even in one of your previous lives that taught you a great deal because it was either a huge failure and you needed to learn a valuable lesson, or it was a great success that you want to build on in the future.
One of the ones that I always think about was a series of short films we did at Kate Spade called Misadventures. And it was back when video content was sort of new to Instagram and to YouTube from brands. And we invested in this, short form series that, Anna Kendrick started starring in it. And then we had a number of different people and really brought, it wasn't commercials. It wasn't direct selling. It really was stories that excited people and got people engaged. And then we experimented with shoppable video. And what I learned a lot from that process was I had an amazing head of creative at the time at Kate Spade, incredible talent that came up with the idea. And she had this amazing idea for the story, but in the end of the day, the distribution of the story was incredibly important. Like how we distributed it was going to make a difference to whether or not it was going to be effective. I had seen somebody speak and say that content is king, but distribution is queen, and she wears the pants. And I think in that case,
and she turns the neck too.
Yeah, exactly. So it was so interesting to have this, incredible creative talent who had this vision, and then to come and say, but it's going to be most effectively delivered. I think at the time it was like 45-second videos. Today it's like 10, but I think people were still watching 45-second videos. And she has this idea for 10 minutes. So how do you take the science of the distribution? Like we think YouTube's going to be most effective. It's this many minutes. It needs to have it needs to engage from the jump. It can't be a slow burn. All of this sort of data and metrics and marrying those two things together. And we didn't hit it out of the park every time, but we really, our head of, digital marketing and then our head of content really came to a happy marriage in how to both create great stories and distribute great stories. And we learned a ton. I think there were 5 or 6 of them, may have been more. And we learned a ton over the series and just kept iterating and making them better and more effective. So it was a great just experience of, again, that art and technology or art and science side, which I think is what we do in marketing today. It really is, how do you marry those two things together?
I love it. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of kind of rapid fire questions for fun that have nothing to do with marketing, really.
Okay.
The first is there a quote or a book or a band or a movie or a sports team that inspires you? And what is it about that thing that inspires you?
Well, I talk to how I read constantly. So I am often inspired by books that I've read. And recently I've read the Heartstoppers series over the last year, which is also a TV series on Netflix. It's obviously from Scholastic, but it's a wonderful series by an author named Alice Oseman. And it is about two young men at a boarding school in England who fall in love. And it's so inspiring to read stories about different types of backgrounds and feelings and people that I don't have experience with directly in terms of my lived experience. I think it's written so thoughtfully and tenderly and respectfully to everyone involved. And I'm inspired by authors who are showing bravery and who are writing stories that I think a lot of kids are, again, that mirror and window out there. So that's been something that's really inspired me recently. And I love the series on Netflix too, but I'm always happy to start with a book and then move on to television.
I'm curious if there's a brand that you've never worked on that really you admire, and what is it about that brand that you admire most?
So there's a brand I'm a little bit obsessed with. I have never worked with them, but I would love to. And it's a brand called Tracksmith. So I'm a runner, and Tracksmith is a very niche running brand. It's really for long distance runners. It started out of Boston, kind of making clothes for long distance runners, not professional, just people who do it because they love it. And I love its great quality product. But they created a community. They do a lot of gear associated with the big marathons. So Boston and New York and Chicago, that is very coveted. They pop up in those cities. And when I'm out running, I see other people wearing Tracksmith. They'll see I'm wearing Tracksmith. And there's a little like, I've got you, like we're on the same team.
Yeah.
And I just, my husband and I went to Boston last year and like wanted to go to their flagship store. I've never really wanted to go to a flagship store of any brand. And I was like, I know what they're doing and I'm still attracted to it. Like I get how they are pulling me in and it's working and I still admire it. So I really admire that they're staying pure. Even now, I don't know when they launched, but it's been a few years and they're still staying pure to their niche in terms of runners. They haven't done a big deal with another brand, to my knowledge. They're staying pure, and I like that so far as someone who loves the product.
Great. So this last question is, I'm wondering if there's a fictional story or a realm in which you would like to live, and what is it about that realm that interests you?
Oh, that one's kind of easy for me. So the reason why I'm a big runner is I have a huge sweet tooth. So I have to balance out the world. So I would be very happy living in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I just like a chocolate river is like my dream. Wallpaper that you can lick and have all the different flavors in your bedroom would be amazing. Willy Wonka himself's a little bit of an odd duck. So but I manage creative personpersonalities very well.
Right.
Okay. But I would be very, very happy. People always say, wouldn't you miss because I could eat just chocolate cake for the rest of my life would be my one food. I would not miss salty snacks. I would not. I would be very content with just sweets for the rest of my life.
Well, let's say Willy Wonka, we'll say the chocolate factory, but without all the brats.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely not with the kids there, just with me. And then Willy comes and visits every often and we can have a great conversation about dreams and things like that. But I would be very happy rowing along the chocolate river for the rest of the day.
I love it. I love it. Well, and it's not bad also to have Oompa Loompas help you out along the way.
For sure. Lots of useful people to add value to the community. So I would love that.
I love it. Well, Mary, this has been such a pleasure. Mary Renner Beech is the Chief Marketing and Transformation Officer for Scholastic. Thank you so much. This has been such a joy.
Joe, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. A fun conversation.